Please make sure that you have your jazz critique sheet available as we go through this explanation. Number one on your jazz critique sheet is the title of the tune, which is simply the name of the current song that you are listening to. Number two is the name of the performer. This could be a single performer or the name of a band. Number three is the name of the specific jazz era that this particular tune fits. You will see as we go through the eras in the book, there are basically two periods of jazz. There is the pre-modern period and there's the modern period. There are approximately 3 or 4 periods that fit into the pre-modern period. Those are ragtime, early jazz, and swing. The modern period includes the first era, bebop, cool jazz, hard bop, free jazz, avant-garde, jazz rock, or fusion. Ragtime is technically not a jazz era in that it actually begins our study before the first era of jazz, which is early jazz. The fourth criteria on your sheet is instrumentation. This is basically the instruments that you hear on the recording or you see up on stage performing the music. The first section of instruments are the rhythm section. That includes drums, bass, some sort of a guitar instrument, and keyboard. Keyboard can be piano, organ, or other types of keyboards. The brass section includes the trumpet, the trombone, the tuba, perhaps a French horn, and certainly the saxophone, even though technically the saxophone might be also considered a woodwind instrument. The reed instruments are definitely the flute, the clarinet, perhaps the saxophone. Certainly in jazz, we occasionally also see the violin, viola, or cello perhaps, and there can be other instruments that are not covered by these above instrumentations. Number 5 on the criteria sheet are the 3 melodic textures: polyphonic, homophonic, monophonic. To explain monophonic, monophonic is a melody without any sort of accompaniment. This, in most popular music, only occurs when there is a break, when the band is playing along and suddenly stops, leaving one solo instrument or perhaps the vocalist absolutely by themselves, perhaps for a few beats or a few bars. Whistling or singing a tune to yourself is obviously a good example of monophonic texture. Homophonic texture is the use of one melody with some sort of accompaniment. This can be a melody played by the right hand of a pianist and the accompaniment of chords played by the left hand, or it could be an entire band accompanying a vocalist who is singing the main melody of the tune, or an instrumentalist who is playing the melody of the tune. It should be noted that an instrument playing the melody of a tune with only just drums in the background, that is also considered homophonic activity. Polyphonic activity is when there are 2 or more distinct melodies happening at the same time, competing for the listener's attention. This is not a situation where there is a secondary melody being used in the background, such as an ostinato or simply background riffs, when the main melody is so distinct that the other melody does not compete with it. These 3 textures can all be used in the same tune, not at the same time, but for different parts of tunes. For example, you can have a short break of perhaps 2, 3, or 4 beats during a tune that consists of a monophonic melody. We will find that polyphonic activity consists primarily of music from the early jazz era and some music of the free jazz era. Otherwise, we are hearing primarily homophonic music with the interspersion of monophonic breaks or stop times. The harmonic or chord texture, as we did explain during the Elements of Music lecture, consists of simple or complex chords. For the pop-oriented jazz, as is for pop-oriented rock and roll and other pop forms, the music is usually very simple chords, chords that perhaps exist in 3 different partials rather than 5 or 6 or 7 partials. Modern jazz period music from bop forward quite often used complex chords. The chord progressions in jazz can have very few chords in the progression or many chords in the progression. Once again, the more popular based music, particularly toward the beginning of jazz in the pre-modern period, had relatively few chords in the progressions, while music of the modern period had many more. There are definite exceptions to this, such as modal jazz or perhaps free jazz. Modal jazz using basically one chord for very long sections of time, and free jazz, which do not use chords virtually at all. Number 8, form or structure. There are actually 4 forms that are relatively common in jazz. The first would be considered the ragtime form, which is a form that has multiple sections and at least 3 different thematic sections included in its form. Quite often, these sections are schematically outlined, so the entire tune might be outlined by a schematic that is A, A, B, B, A, C, C, D, D, which happens to be the schematic outline for Maple Leaf Rag. The important point about the ragtime form is that it has to have at least 3 different sections, so it has to have an A, a B, and a C. That does not mean that there cannot be other forms without a C. Even in the AABA song form that we'll talk about in a moment, you can have a C section substituted for the B occasionally. The second common form of jazz is the 12-bar blues. This is a one-section piece of music with 12 bars being repeated time after time after time. We should mention that we probably should have introduced meter at this point, probably before form, because the way that you're going to figure out what the sections are made up of is by counting the bars in the section. And to do that, you'll have to count the beats in the bars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4. Once again, the 12-bar blues are 12 bars of music, and then you start the same progression of chords or melody all over again, so that the blues is simply a series of 12-bar sections. The song form is a 4-section form. Typically, it is schematically outlined, the most common form, as AABA song form. There is also an ABAB song form that is not quite as common. In the AABA form, all of the A sections are the same chord progressions and perhaps even the same melody. The B section, which is the 3rd section of the form, is a different progression of chords, perhaps a different melody. This section is also called the bridge, the channel, or the release. In the ABAB form, this simply sounds like 2 larger sections, A, then B, and then another large section, A, B. So it becomes an ABAB. Both A's are exactly the same progression, and the B's are exactly the same progression. But it makes it sound like there are 2 larger sections rather than 4 smaller ones. Quite often the song form was called the 32-bar song form because each of the smaller sections, A, B, A, were only 8 bars long, creating a 32-bar long chorus. Now this also brings up the term chorus, which is not synonymous, as many musicians and many audience members presume, with the word refrain. A chorus is essentially defined as one playing through of the entire chord progression of a song or the entire form of the song. So the song might be the song form, and it would be an AABA form, and you could have several AABAs in the music before the tune ends. Meter is the number of beats in each measure. This is most commonly in most popular forms of music 4. Occasionally it can be 3. But certainly in more progressive forms or eras of any type of music, it can be other types of meters as well. The tempo is simply the speed of the beat or how fast the music is moving. On the form, you will basically use your own judgment as to whether the music is very fast, medium slow, or very slow. The instrumental solos are simply the name of the instrument that takes the either written tune solo, which means playing of the original melody of the tune, or the improvised solos. If the music is being played polyphonically or as a part of what we call collective improvisation, then you can name all of the instruments that are playing the melodies at the same time. If the music is medium fast or faster, it is automatically a shout tune. If it is a slower tune, we can call it a ballad or perhaps a croon tune. Call and response is a device that's been used since early blues and perhaps even earlier times. Call and response comes from several different sources. The slaves working in the field with the leader of the slave group doing a call and the rest of the group responding. Sometimes this was considered a secret communication for slaves. It also happens in church when you have a responsorial with the leader saying one thing and the congregation responding with a response of some type. On this question, you will simply go ahead and indicate whether there is call and response. You will have at some point during the critique sheet the opportunity to describe what instruments are doing the call and what instruments are doing the response. Breaks are periods during a piece of music when the band is basically that is accompanying the soloist or the collective improvisation stops, leaving the soloist by him or herself for a brief period of time. The band then picks up with its regularly played rhythm and the break is over. If it is a vocalist who is filling up the area of the break, it's called a vocal break. And if it is an instrumentalist that's filling up the area of the break, it's called instrumental. An ostinato is a short piece of melody that is repeated over and over and over again. This can be called a riff, but it recedes to the background of the tune. It makes the tune recognizable, but it is not the main melody of the tune. The rhythmic feel of the tune has to do with how we divide the beats. Quite often in music, we divide the beats in half. This will give us an indication of the rhythmic feel. When the beats are equal in length and the halves of the beats are equal in length, where we have a situation such as da 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 or tick 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 tick, where each of the halves of the beats are exactly the same length, that is called straight time. When the halves of the beats, or the notes that are played right on the beat and then the note that's played in between that beat and the next beat, are unequal, where the first part of the beat gets 2/3 of the beat and the second note gets 1/3. For this kind of a demonstration, da 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 da, or dut 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 dut. That particular feel is called swing feel. As we speed up that feel, it becomes very difficult for instrumentalists to maintain that true 2/3, 1/3 type of indication, and they begin to emphasize the second note on the beat rather than trying to play it truly as 1/3 of the beat. And that becomes what we know as bop swing. So when we get to the bop era, we will talk about bop swing rather than true swing. There are a couple of other types of rhythmic feels, such as Latin music, whenever there is a Latin beat, such as a rumba or a bossa nova or a samba. We would put down Latin. If there is a rock beat, and typically jazz musicians during the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and later played music with rock beats, quite often it was the funk feel. Criteria number 18 is any change in the following: meter, tempo, form, or dynamics. That means there is a very distinct change from one meter to another, from one tempo to another, one form to another, or one dynamic to another. Quite often dynamics change when jazz musicians play their music. The other three forms, particularly in the more popular eras of jazz, did not change that often. Number 19 is stop time. Stop time is simply a series of breaks, one after another, separated by band hits. So the band might play a note on one of each measure and then leave the rest of the measure open for the soloist, or they might play on 1 and 3. Dot, 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 dot. And in between those band hits, the soloist would continue playing their solo. The last criteria element is the improvisation, describing the improvisation that takes place in the tune. The first thing you need to put down is the name of the instrument that does the improvisation, and you may have several instruments improvising in the same tune. After the name of the instrument, you need to describe for that instrument the main improvisational type, which will be either original improvisation or non-original improvisation. If the musician is simply playing around with the original written melody of the tune, changing a few notes here and there, but you can still basically hear the main melody, that's called non-original improvisation. But if the solo improviser is making up an entirely new melody made up of different rhythms and different melodic passages, that's called original improvisation. Finally, after you put the instrument, its major type of improvisation, you will also put the methods that are used. In non-original improvisation, there's really only one method that is used. It's called elaboration or embellishment. If the improvisation is original, then there are several types or methods of improvisation. There is scalar improvisation. Running your hands straight up a piano's white keys will give you the idea of what a scale is. There is chord tone improvisation, where you skip over every other note in a scale, creating the sounds of a chord within your improvisation. There is the quote, which is basically taking a recognizable piece of melody from another tune and interpolating it in the improvisation that you're doing. And there is also riff improvisation, creating your own small pieces of melodies and repeating those small pieces of melody throughout your improvisation. The last criteria element is simply 2 or 3 additional comments that further technically describe the music. My best example of what this critique sheet should be used for is for a test for the class. If I were to have a colleague of mine come in and play a different tune for each one of you, and you were to fill out the entire critique sheet with the exception of number 1 and number 2, and I were still able to recognize the artist and the name of the tune you were trying to describe, then that would be a passing grade.